Welcome to the Startup Grind.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Rich Foreman, and welcome to Startup Grind Sacramento. And just a little bit about Startup Grind. As an organization, we represent 2 million entrepreneurs. We're in 600 cities and 125 countries. We've been in places like we were in places like Iran until the government kicked us out, and Russia. But entrepreneurship is basically worldwide, and our mission is basically provide education and opportunities and access for all startups to build, grow, and scale their company. And when I first joined Startup Grind, they had these signs that it says, make friends, not contacts, give, not take, and help others before you help yourself. And when I first saw it, I thought it was very corny. But I've been with this is probably my 7th year with Startup Grind, and our values is really something that has helped us out. So for you other entrepreneurs out there, you know that this can be a very lonely journey. So as a community, we could help each other out. I know personally, I've helped and mentored other startups. I know JDM has done that as well, and he's very giving. So as a community, we could help each other out. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to pass it over to Laura Good, who calls herself the Startup Sac Den Mother, and she's going to give us an update on what's going on in Sacramento. Oh, Laura, you're muted.
Sorry, I have an allergy cough, so it's annoying. Yeah, so I'm with Startup Sac, and Startup Sac is a nonprofit that is focused on helping entrepreneurs in the greater Sacramento region be successful. So we do that. We have a website that has quite a few resources of organizations in our region who are helping entrepreneurs, as well as some resources that we put together ourselves. And then we also, like Startup Grind, we have events, usually a couple a month. In fact, our next one I've posted in the chat is tomorrow at 5 p.m. Startup Happy Hour. And our guest companies are EV Life and iRate. Both of them started in 2019, and both of them have really leveraged what's available both here in our region as well as in the state of California and in Silicon Valley. So we hope you'll join us for that. And then I've also posted in the chat about 1 Million Cups. Josh and I are on the organizer team for 1 Million Cups. We meet every Wednesday morning, and 2 entrepreneurs share their stories with an audience of their peers, and then peers ask questions, provide feedback. So it's a great experience. And then also the Startup Digest is a weekly email that comes out on Monday mornings that has all the best events for startup founders in our region. And then I think lastly, we have a private Facebook group called the Startup Sac Community Group. There's about 900 entrepreneurs in that. So anytime you feel like connecting with the entrepreneurial community in Sacramento, you can do so in that group. And it is moderated, so for the most part, it's useful information. So I invite you to join that. And that's all I got.
Okay. Thanks, Laura. And now this is a time for elevator pitch. So we have two brave volunteers. So let's go with Lily first. If you want to maybe give a few minutes about a couple minutes about what you're doing, Lily.
Sure. I have to say we're very brand spanking new. But basically me and my partner, we are building the Sephora for periods and vaginas, but online. Currently, people who are biologically female who have vaginas only have 2 options to purchase things that go for their period. And that's either going to a retail store, which has the same old stuff. And also it's just annoying to go to, or they have to spend a lot of time online trying to figure out new things that they haven't tried before. And at the same time, they're missing a community. So we want to create one place online, a store where they can buy really any product that would serve their needs as someone who has a vagina, whether it's for their periods, it's for their menstrual hormones, for their energy, you name it. We want to build that. And we've started with a newsletter that anyone can follow. It's called pinklemonadeco.substack.com. And in it, we're right now sharing different tips of what people can do during the month. And soon we'll be doing product reviews so that we can send people to our store.
So Lily, do you actually have the product online? Or are you doing like in this, what's it called? Like Amazon has an affiliate program type of thing?
We're not doing an affiliate program. And we don't have products yet. We want to sell other people's products. That's where we want to start with. And we basically want there to be one place where you can go for expertise and just higher product diversity, because those two things are just not present in one space right now. You can go to Amazon and buy some period products. I don't recommend it because Amazon's stuff's really shady and you don't want to buy stuff they're going to put inside of your body. But, or you could go to these like individual stores where they will provide some expertise, but they're only selling their own stuff. So hopefully, we're hoping that if we create one space, kind of like Sephora does for makeup lovers, we will be able to find a lot of really cool products that exist but are on Instagram and bring them to people easier, but also motivate people to create even more products. I mean, half the world has a vagina. There should be more products than just a handful. And we're hoping we can kind of like push that forward.
All right, that's cool. All right, thanks, Lily, for volunteering. Tracy, do you want to say a few words about your startup?
Sure. So my company is called HR Easy. So I do HR consulting. I do diversity, equity, and inclusion training. And I provide services primarily to small and medium-sized companies who are looking for some fractional C-suite experience that maybe they can't afford on a full-time basis, but a part-time basis. I've been in HR for 20-some years, primarily as an executive in some bigger corporations, VP of HR with Sleep Train, Mattress Firm, Golden One, Chief HR Officer, Safe Credit Union, before starting off on my own with HR Easy. So that's what I do, and I'll give it back over to you.
So Tracy, for startups, at what point would they need to have to start considering, we need to have someone from HR, or even consider using your service?
Pretty much when they have employees, if they don't know all the employment laws or how to even create the different documents that they may need. So as soon as you know that you're going to add employees to your organization, it's a good idea to get a handbook, to make sure all your posters are in order, to make sure your policies, procedures are in place. If you're looking for, information system to track your timekeeping and payroll, or any of those kind of functions, build a benefit plan. I don't actually do the benefits, but I can help you identify which ones you need, which ones you need to have. So I help people navigate all the people issues in their organization, or when they're dealing with the messy, ugly situation, I come in and help them with that.
Okay, that's very cool.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Tracy. And now let me start my next slide. Oh, so this is just housekeeping. It sounds like we're all veterans here, but just in general, please keep yourself muted. And actually, JDM, do you want people to ask questions out loud, or do you want them just to write chat? How do you want to handle Q&A, or do you want to do it at the very end? I forgot to ask you about this.
Yeah, good question. So I'm more than happy for people to raise hands during the talk, or they can drop questions in the chat. I'll keep monitoring that. Otherwise, I have dedicated time for Q&A at the end.
Okay, all right.
But if I'm being totally unclear, definitely call me out.
All right. So what JDM said. So you could use the Q&A or raise your hand. And the question that's always being asked, this is being recorded, and I made sure it was recorded because it's being recorded now. All right, so I'd like to introduce JDM, or Josh David Miller. I first met JDM actually at a startup weekend. in Elk Grove several years ago. His team placed second, just FYI. And he's just been an amazing resource in our community. He has his own consulting company, The Right Box, but he's been an advisor for the Growth Factory, the Carlson Center. The last live event was a startup weekend, and Josh did a great job hosting it. And he also is I think you're the lead for 1 Million Cups, which is one of our cornerstone organizations here in Sacramento. And he also, one of the jokes is what is it, the business plan shredder? Is that what your nickname is? So
The shredder of business models.
The shredder of business models. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing and hand it over to Josh.
All right, well, cool. So thanks so much for everyone coming. I'm really excited to be here talking about my favorite subject, which is business models. So as Rich said, I'm going to kind of just talk for a while. I will try to keep you interested and engaged. And if you are, if you have any questions along the way, you can drop them in the chat, raise your Zoom hand, something like that. Otherwise, we'll do some Q&A at the end. So that's basically how that'll work. I'm going to go ahead and keep my video spotlit here so that you can see my slides. Let's dive in. So in case you have no idea what you signed up for and you just clicked the link because Laura or Rich asked you to, I'm here to talk about how to design a winning business model, even if or especially if you are a first-time founder, because it's a really hard topic. We have a lot of questions about it. So let's just do it. All right. Let's just dive on in. All right. Now, I want to find out a little bit about who's here. I know a lot of you, so that's fantastic, but it wouldn't be complete here if we just didn't get some hellos going. So what I want you to do is drop in the chat. What are you working on right now? If you have a startup, that's fantastic. If you just have a job, that's fantastic too. Or if you just have kids, that's fantastic too. But 10 words or less, throw down into the chat while I'm introducing myself, who you guys are and what you're working on. I'd love to hear it. There's a few other times I'm going to ask you to drop something in the chat. This is the lowest bar here so let's do it. Okay, cool. So while you guys are telling me who you are, as Rich said, my name is JDM, aka Josh David Miller, aka the shredder of business models, aka that weird guy in the colorful shoes. And it doesn't really work as well on Zoom, but for the record, I am wearing bright blue Allbirds today. So I'm keeping it real even in my home office. If you want to, know more about me or connect with me on something, you can go to jdm.bio. All the relevant links are there. But basically, you know where I'm coming from when I talk about this stuff. I do 4 things. So one is the community stuff that Rich mentioned. I do, 1 Million Cups and startup weekends and stuff like that. I'm a mentor at Growth Factor. I'm a mentor at the Carlson Center. I do talks and workshops like this one and so forth. I create content across the internet, YouTube, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, all that stuff, which is fun. And I also do one-on-one coaching with some founders. And as Rich said, I run a consulting company that helps startups find product market fit faster. So that's the lens that I come out with all this. And it's all about traction. It's all about product market fit. It's all about, launching now and scaling. And that's how I think about business models. So we're going to go through kind of just like the way that I think about this, which is probably not quite the way you're thinking about it. I love you guys are dropping this in the chat. This is great. We got fintech going on. We got cloud startups here. Lily, of course, did hers. We got t-shirts, so much cool stuff. Thank you so much for dropping that in while I'm talking. And so this might not be how you think about business models. And that's probably the point. So we just did introductions. We kind of finished with that. This is the last slide of the intros. And then we're going to talk about business models 101. What is a business model really at the end of the day? And it's probably not going to be the answer you expect unless you've heard me talk about this particular thing before. Then we're going to talk about business model patterns. And this is fun. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I just want to plant the seed in your head for something super cool you can do with business models. Next, I want to talk about what investors look for when they're just in terms of the business model. What are investors looking for? And we're going to make that super, super simple. And then we're going to talk about how you find the weakest part of your business model and develop a plan to test it. And of course, we'll do Q&A. And if we end up with a little free time, I will open up the floor for you to pitch me your business and I will shred it in real time on the recording with love. Okay, so that's that. Let's dive in. First things first, what's a business model? Like, what are we even talking about here when we talk about a business model? Like, there's two parts there. There's business and model. So let's break it down. So let's think about a model first. A model is just like something that you can keep in your head that helps you contextualize what we're talking about. So we can make sense of it. So we can ask good questions and that kind of thing, right? It's a mental framework. We use models for all kinds of things. There's mathematical models that we use to project outcomes of elections. There's financial models for a business. And there's all kinds of different models, one of which is a business model. And if we oversimplify it, like way down, a business model is just the rationale for how an organization creates, captures, and delivers value for a specific customer. And it's those four components that are really important. There's a customer for whom we're creating some value and we're delivering it to them, we're getting that to them somehow, and we're capturing some value in return because, we're a business and we need to get some money too, right? And then my favorite tool for this is not like a business model canvas. It's not the lean canvas. Those are great. But when you're just starting out and you're trying to build up a business model and make some sense about the thing that you're working on, a business model canvas is a lot. It can be like really overwhelming. It can be a bit too much. And you end up giving like these really shallow answers for all 9 boxes. Really just start with just those 4 components. That's all you need to start with. Like, this is what my business model is. So we call this the magic triangle. And there's a reason for it that I'll get to when we talk about patterns, but it's these 4 components with the customer at the middle, because we're talking about design thinking after all at the end of the day. So the customer sits at the middle, but we're talking about 4 questions: who, what, how, and why, that make up the magic triangle. Let's break each down. So we're logically going to start with who, because again, design thinking, center of the pyramid here, center of our triangle. And this is just who's our customer. Like, what are the problems that they have? What are their needs? What are their issues? What are their wants, their needs, their fears? All of that stuff, who they are, is just at the core of everything that we're doing. If you're starting with a product and you're starting to think about what's happening, inside the company and not what's happening outside the company, you're making a grave mistake, because all business starts with the person who's going to pay for your product with money. So we got to start with them, right? So first question is who. Second question is what. Like, what do we deliver to our customers? What's the value we're creating? What's our value proposition, right? To use a term that you're probably more familiar with. Like, what do we do to meet those wants, those needs, their fears? How do we solve their problems? So this is literally like the thing that we're doing. It's our product at the end of the day, or at least a component of our product, right? So what are we doing to deliver value to our customers? And next is, how do we actually do that? How do we take that value proposition and that value that we're supposed to create and literally get it to a customer? How do we get it in front of them? That can be, if you're an app, right, then part of your how is an app, and part of your how is the app store, but it's way more than that. It's at all stages of life cycle. So it's from awareness to acquisition to activation, all the way through referral. There's all these places along their customer life cycle where we're kind of getting in front of them to get to create that value. And all of that comes down to this question of how. You can also call this like a value chain or a value network, particularly for those of you who are manufacturing a good or getting a good manufactured or distributed, like the t-shirts, like Pink Lemonade, and all that stuff. You guys are having products that are getting delivered. So you have a value chain as part of that how. And then lastly, we have, why does this make money? So we have, there's the math part of it, right? There's costs and there's revenue. And if we take revenue and we subtract cost, that should be a positive number. And that's our profit, right? So why does it make money? But it's actually more than that. It's like, why are we financially viable? Why is there a volume of customers out there? Not just a customer, but there's a volume of them out there, such that there's enough of them we can turn this into something interesting, right? Is their pain severe enough that they're going to pay good money to actually solve this problem, or good money being defined as money sufficient to make it worth our while to actually solve it in the manner that we're solving it, right? But why does this actually make money? And I just noticed that the wrong item is highlighted there. Obviously, the green should be highlighted for why. My apologies. But why does this make money? And that's it. Who, what, how, and why. A business model is only those 4 things. And if you take a business model canvas, those 9 boxes that you have on a business model canvas all fit into one of those 4 categories. Some of them touch more than one, but it's still just looking at these 4 things. So when you're just getting started and you're just looking at like, what does my business do? Don't do a business model canvas. Don't do a lean canvas. Don't do any of that. Just know these 4 things. And that's going to tell you what you need to focus on and look at to build this into a successful business. Okay. So question from Brian in the chat, do we need 2 triangles for marketplace businesses? Okay, so great question. If you're doing a two-sided market or a multi-sided market or a platform of some kind that connects 2 parties together, think of like eBay where there's a buyer and a seller, or Airbnb where there's a renter and a rentee, right? Or if you're doing an advertising-based business where you have like Google, right, where you have a user, you have somebody else doing ads or whatever. In all those cases, you do have 2 different customers for whom you're creating 2 different pieces of value. I'm not sure I would say that it's necessarily 2 different triangles, but yes, you do have 2 customers, 2 different value propositions. You probably have some overlap in the value chain, but they may not be 100% overlap, but they're probably not 100% separate either. Like there's still the platform that they're connecting through. So there's overlap with that. And then the revenue logic is tightly wound into those 2 different marketplaces. So yes and no at the same time, if that makes sense. And then Lily asked, how detailed and niche does an answer have to be for each triangle? So when you're just getting started, you just want to start at the surface, because as you go through the process, which we'll talk about in a minute, as you go through the process, you're going to get more detailed as you go. But what you just want to start with is clarity on what the heck am I doing? And so when you're answering like, what the heck am I doing? It's okay to just say like, we're an app, we're serving a customer like this, and here's our value proposition, and here's how we think we're going to get in front of customers and get distribution and blah, blah, blah. And it's going to make money because we're going to charge a subscription model, something like that. And that's enough to get started. But then as you start breaking down and getting into the process, you're going to say like, well, I need some really detailed information about my customer, because I'm going to need to find them. I'm going to need to know what resonates with them. I'm going to need to know how they feel inside, right? There's all that information you're going to have to gather. And so you're going to get more and more detail. Similarly, when it comes to your revenue logic, like same idea, you're going to need to start breaking down how all this stuff works, and you're going to get into more details about operational costs and so forth. So you're going to start really high level, and you're just going to get more detail as you acquire more information, as you acquire more data. Good questions. So chapter 2. Right? So let's talk about business model patterns, because this is something that I'm actually really excited about. I'm going to say something that's probably a little bit surprising, which is that if we go back, if we rewind all the way to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, right? 160 plus years ago, we go all the way back to the beginning of the Industrial Revolution to today, and we look at all the business models that have existed from them to now, all the great innovations that have existed, everything from, from the railroad and steam engines to factory processes and cars and the internet and space travel. We take every single innovation from then to today. 95% of them, 95% did not invent a new business model. They leveraged a pattern, an existing business model. And a really good example of that is the razors and blades model. So named from King Gillette, who created the Gillette razor company, right, in 1903, something like that. And we named it after him, even though it actually predates him, and the story's kind of apocryphal, but we name it after him to say that he was like, well, everybody's just buying these straight razors, and they're, shaving with them, and they buy the razor once, and then they just sharpen it, and they kind of do it over time. And he said, well, no, what we can do is we can offer the razor unit, and we can do that like super cheap or even free. And then once they buy that, they have to keep replacing the blades on top because they're not sharpenable, right? They can keep replacing the blades over time so that we get an initial bit of revenue, but then we get that revenue ongoing, right? And that same pattern, the same razors and blades was used again later on for something like inkjet printers. You used to buy the printer at a super steep discount, but those ink cartridges that you had to buy over time were crazy expensive. Same thing for the iTunes store and the Apple iPod. The Apple iPod was not the first MP3 player, wasn't the second MP3 player. What they did that was so revolutionary was that they plugged in this app store, this music store that you could go into to get music, so that you could buy the iPod, which of course they didn't do cheap or free, but you could buy the iPod, but then they're making money ongoing on the music. Same thing with cell phones, same thing with the Kindle, right? App stores on your phone, all of that stuff is a razors and blades model. It's not actually brand new. So nothing new under the sun, your business is going to make use of a pattern too, which is amazing, because then we can actually just start saying like, well, let's leverage some of the patterns. So we just talked about razors and blades, right? Where you have a free or cheap product, right? But then you get ongoing revenue over time, and that lowers the initial barrier to purchase, but you get recurring revenue over time. Pretty amazing. Awesome. Dope, right? Another one, super common if you're doing an app out there, is a subscription model, right? Where you just get regular transactions per person over time. So you get this continuous stream of income, but you get that in exchange for high availability. I can access the app whenever I want and lower usage costs. So I'm not paying a huge amount out of pocket. I'm just paying $10 a month, right? Not $1,000 to get access to this thing. So you get that subscription model, and that works for software, but also works for Dollar Shave Club is a description, and supply that I have here in the screenshot. Those are subscriptions as well. So lots of kinds of subscriptions. And then we have, I'm just going to do two more. So we have target the poor, right? So this is where you segment the market based on income, or based on at least their availability of cash that they have. And you go after those who don't have a lot of money or aren't going to spend a lot of money. And so you differentiate your product by making it super affordable. Think Southwest Airlines. That was what they did. They went after, they segmented the market based on price and said, we're going to be cheap. We're going to get smaller profits at a higher volume, right? So target the poor. The exact opposite of that is the ultimate luxury. This is where you focus on customers on the other end. You focus on people who do have money, and you differentiate on quality, on the privilege of accessing this thing, and on the service that they get out of it, right? So you're getting higher profit margins, but at a lower volume because there aren't as many of them out there. So there are actually 55 business model patterns out there. And if you hit up this link, it'll redirect you to a place on the internet. It's actually the website of the book Business Model Navigator that talks about this in a lot more detail. I do recommend the book. And you can take a look at all 55 business model patterns. Quick note, they did put a paywall on it very recently, which I'm not too thrilled about. So you only get access to like 5 of them for free before they start charging you per month. So just keep that in mind when you start browsing. But it's still a good resource for that. So next time, I told you we're going to keep coming. So drop down in the chat. I'm curious, what are some patterns you guys are using? Are you using any of these, or are there others that you're that you know about that are kind of getting leveraged in your business? Just kind of let me know. Curious what patterns we have on here. And while you're doing that, while you're telling me what patterns you're using, talk about how you make use of those patterns, because this is the cool part. What you could do is you can start with, okay, I have this basic idea. I did this magic triangle. I know who, what, why, and how. And now you can go to this list of 55 patterns, and you can ask for each of the 55, what would it look like if I take that pattern and apply it to my business? And so if you take something like a subscription model and you want to change it into like a razors and blades model, for example, then you're going to be looking at it like, okay, so that means that the value proposition has to change a little bit. Maybe the money is going to obviously going to change too, because we're going to getting something over time as opposed to this initial amount of money, right? And so the value chain is going to have to change as well. And you should start looking at what it looks like. And the vast majority of those 55 that you try are going to be junk. They're going to be worthless, and they're going to be garbage. But in there's going to be some gold hypotheses that you can play with later on. So it's a great way to find alternative business models, to try to find something that's most right for your business. Because what happens more often than not with startups is that they will just pick a business model out of the box and then never change it. And they'll get really deep into the startup process without ever really revisiting this core assumption that they made from the start about what their business model should be. So I encourage you to do that work up front and develop some hypotheses and get some ideas. Okay, so Marcus asked in the chat, which business models are more fundable? So I assume by fundable, you're referring to investment. And so there isn't really a direct correlation between what is fundable and the business model. I'm going to talk about what investors look for in a minute, but what it really is about here is the scale that you can get from it. The scale, and not in terms of the number of customers, but in terms of the available dollars and the value of the business. So if you can do that with a luxury good and you still have a scalable business, then it's still attractive. So that it's not necessarily a question of which one's more fundable than not, but there are some that are much more common. So like subscription is obviously really common. And it's very well understood. So if you're doing something in the software space, app space, and you're doing a subscription model, your path to funding is probably more straightforward because everybody you're pitching to knows exactly how subscriptions work. Whereas you start getting into something more complicated, it might be more fundable in the sense that it's more interesting, more innovative, it has a potential higher market cap and all that stuff. But your path to finding funding is a little bit maybe more complicated because you have to explain a more complex business model. But I don't think that there's a really direct correlation between those two. So Kate says, not sure what my pattern would be, but initial plans to sell specialized free-form baked goods at farmers markets and then maybe to coffee shops as well. Okay, cool. So that's actually a great one because you're selling like direct to consumers, which is fantastic. But there's a couple of patterns in there. And the one at the farmers market, we might call as a shop in shop. I'm not sure if it's technically that at a farmer's market, but it's like that. So this is a shop in shop is like when you go to Best Buy and they have like the place where all the Google products are and all the Apple products and all the Microsoft products, right? And they have the section like the Google shop inside Best Buy, which by the way is what prevented Best Buy from getting murdered by Amazon is actually their adaptation to these shops in shops. But anyway, so yeah, shop in shop is probably a pattern that you're using there. It's in the list of 55s. Then if you go to coffee shops, you're getting more into not a shop in shop because you're probably just going into, you know, a display case, right? So it's not, they might advertise that it's you, but it's not like a shop in a shop. At that point, you're just doing wholesale and you're going wholesale to, which is a pattern as well into them. So there's two patterns right there. Oh, pop-up is probably another really close one for shop and shop, like a farmer's market could be considered a pop-up as well. And yeah, all that talk about pastries got me hungry too, Laura. So hoping Kate's going to get us some pastries and hook us up here. Do you have worksheets where we can develop our business model? I do have a simple Google Doc with some questions on it. Remind me, Rich, and I will get that so we can get that to people later. Okay, and then Sam says this is a subscription model better for a fintech or a razors and blade models. Fintech is tricky with regard to business models. So those wise, it's probably going to depend on more specifics there. So let's after I get through all the content, Sam, come back to that question at the end, and I bet we can talk about it a little bit. Cool. All right. So now let's move into that's kind of business models. That's patterns. That's all the groundwork here. Now let's talk about what investors look for in a business model. And this is going to be a little bit different than what you might be looking for. Because I'm not going to say, well, you know, you're going to put this on this slide or not. I actually want to teach you to think about how you should be thinking about startups. Metacognition was one of the things Rich said that I have an affinity for, or at least an interest in. So what investors are looking for in any startup that we invest in is a credible theory of hugeness. And not every business has a credible theory of hugeness because not all businesses need them. But a startup that's trying to get equity investment has to have a credible theory of hugeness. I want to break down what that is. So there's three words: credible, theory, and hugeness. And I'm going to go in a reverse order. So let's start with hugeness, right? So what we're saying is that in order to get an investor for equity interested in putting money into our company, we have to give them the ability to exit out later for a big sum of money. So early stage investments, crazy risky. And so they're going to put money into us, and then our company's going to grow, and get further funding, and you know, the company's going to have some success. And what they're after is what we usually call a liquidity event, where the startup is they go IPO. So they're traded on a public exchange, it's public stock market, right? Or they get acquired by a private equity firm, by a competitor, or somebody wants to enter that space or whatever. So those are the events where all the investors get paid. So and in order to get an IPO or in order to get one of those big acquisitions, you have to get to a really big profitable company, or at least the potential of it. So you have to have hugeness, right? Huge dollar amounts to get equity investment, or at least to get interest in equity investment. So credible theory of hugeness. The next one is you have to have a theory of how you're going to get there, because you're not huge yet. So how do you get from where you are to really huge? You have to say, here's how we're going to do it. It's like, it's the business model, to go to market. It's all that stuff. You say how you're going to get from where you are to there. It's probably not right, but it needs to be compelling enough that you can kind of start heading down that path with confidence that you can figure it out. They're not wild ass guesses. It's the theory. It makes sense, right? And that leads us to the credible part of the credible theory of hugeness, that theory of how you're going to get big has to be compelling. It has to be convincing. It has to be cohesive. It has to be coherent or credible, right? You have to have data. You have to have evidence behind the theory that says this theory makes sense. So to say your business model makes sense means that you have a product that's really resonating with customers, whatever resonating looks like. I'll get to that in a second. You have to have evidence that the who, what, how, and why are right, and that those are the things that are going to lead you to that huge thing. That there are these customers out there with this problem. There's enough of them to be interesting. that this is the solution that they actually want for this problem. We're giving it to them in the way that they want to have it, and we're charging money for it, how and the quantity that they're willing to pay, and that is profitable. So you have to have data on those things, right? So you have to have a credible theory of hugeness. That's what any investor is looking for. And shout out that the term credible theory of hugeness, I'm pretty sure it comes from Alex Blumberg, who's the founder of Gimlet Media, the podcast network. Okay, so the idea of credibility, when we talk about evidence, right, for this theory, that's usually what we call traction, right? Traction is the evidence that we look for, but traction is not just sales. So we think about traction as, oh, like I've got traction in the market, we got all these customers buying. And yeah, that's a form of traction. That's true. But it's not just sales, because traction is like the end result. If we're looking for evidence for this thing working, for it making sense, the ultimate evidence at the end of the day is, of course, people buying the product. But before then, there's all kinds of evidence that, oh, we found customers out there. Oh, they really do have this problem. This value, this is resonating with them. And oh, this is the solution they want. Our value prop is really resonating with them. And then it's, oh, then it's the money part of it, right? So I like to have a little bit broader definition of traction. So I call traction the acquisition of compelling, confirmatory data that you're on the right track. That's what we're looking for, right? Is how do we know if we're on the right track? Okay, so I'm gonna pause here for a second. Another question. So Rich said, is a business model getting traction, no or little revenue, then acquisition? I'm not sure I understand the question. Is a business model getting traction, no or little revenue, then acquisition? Can you elaborate on that a little bit, Rich? And then
it's kind of like I think WhatsApp had the same model. Like they didn't really have a revenue model, but they gained a lot of users and they got acquired. And I think the same thing with Instagram.
Right. And so like that's getting much more rare because they're much riskier these days. But yeah, those are absolutely still there. So like this is the idea of like, that's why I like the definition of traction a little bit different, is that when you're building something like Instagram, like you can't build sales in from day one, because sales are ads. Ads are only valuable if you have a large number of users, and you have to be able to target those users really effectively. If you're able to with great granularity target a user, that increases the value of that ad placement. So from day one, you literally can't get sales if they're not interesting. And so their focus for something like that is not on revenue. It's on getting a huge number of users and getting really high engagement, because once you get those and network effects and things go really big, then there's a value, quote unquote, to the company that like their valuation, right, that doesn't come from their revenue number, because it was understood from the beginning that revenue came later. But those are getting much more rare. Cool. All right. So if we're talking about traction, how to get traction and all that stuff, you got to start with the weakest part of your business model, right? Because that's the part that's going to break traction. It's like a hole in your tire, right? The tire needs to cling to the road. You got a hole in your tire, and right? So what we want to find at any one point in time is what is likely to doom us next. And so I want to talk about that a little bit more. Mehdi asks, you mean the number of customers bringing revenue to the company? So it depends. So you're talking about really a couple of different things. It's a math equation. At the end of it, there's how many potential customers are out there, like your obtainable market. And then of that attainable market, how much are we getting, like, I'll just say impressions, even though it's not totally accurate, but how, what kind of awareness are we getting, putting a message in front of customer? How many of them are actually, going through and are we acquiring, and then what percentage of them activate, and then what percent of them actually pay us money? So you're looking at those things along the way. It's not necessarily the number of people. It could be people and revenue, but it's all based on those two things being part of a system that is the theory that leads us to all this theoretical money. So it's going to be different business to business. Okay, so like we say, all right, like at the end of the day, we want to figure out how you test a business model, right? That's what we really want to figure out, is how do we actually go about the process of testing a business model? And I'm curious, before we really get into this too deep here, I want to I want to ask you guys, like, how would you go about testing a business model? So let's say you figure out these four components. You got who, what, how, and why, and you kind of put that in. You're like, okay, I want to test this now. I'm curious. How do you think that you might go about testing it? I'm very curious. Go ahead and like drop something in the chat. How are you going to go about testing this? And while we do that, I'm going to talk about how that most people, when we think about how you test a business model, think about a minimum viable product. They think about an MVP, right? And so just so we're all on the same page, the MVP is the smallest prototype that you can build, right? It's reduced to the smallest, simplest little iteration to actually test the business model, but not any simpler than that, right? Small as possible, but no simpler for that. But when we say to test a business model, what do we mean by that, right? What do we mean? Before I answer that, great stuff come in. So we've got pilot programming, talking to customers, Brian, that's right. Paying attention, getting their feedback and what is and what's not working for them. Love those answers. Keep those coming. That's really cool. So what are we testing when we talk about like this business model? Yeah, we're talking about who, what, how, and why, but what does it mean to test it? Like what is an MVP actually looking at? Well, it's looking at a system. And if you look at any business on the planet, from whatever you're working on to Walmart, to Toyota, to an app that you just random app you get in the store, every set business can be described in this exact same way, right? And we call them pirate metrics. These are it's awareness, activation, awareness, acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. It's those key metrics, and what each business looks at is probably going to be different, but they're all described in that same general way. Acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. And they're called pirate metrics because it's an acronym for R, right? Acquisition, activation, retention, revenue, and referral. So those five numbers. Now let's take each of them in turn and say this is like the system that we're looking at, right? So any business has to be able to find customers somewhere, right? We got to get a pool of people out there, and we got to get those people to come to us and kind of just look at us, right? Our landing page, whatever, they got to look at us and say, okay, I see the product, right? That's what it is. But that's not enough. We then need to get them to actually start getting value out of it. We need them to actually do something meaningful. Because Rich mentioned Instagram is a good example. Like you can sign up for an Instagram account, but they don't really care unless you post a picture or comment on a picture. Then you've activated, you've started to get value out of the system. You've demonstrated that, oh, okay, I sort of loosely kind of maybe-ish get it, right? So you start activating, they get interested in the business. But we can't stop there because we are in this for money. We need to get revenue, right? So we need to get our customers to start paying us money. We start capturing value out of that. And that's not enough. Like we don't want them to do it once. We want to keep our customers over a period of time. We want to retain them. High churn will kill your startup. It'll just burn through the market. So we need to keep them in our system for a long period of time. And then finally, we want to get to a point where our customers are sending us more customers, where what we're doing to build out our product is itself leading to more customers as opposed to us running ads, right? So it's a whole system: acquisition, activation, revenue, retention, referral that form this whole system. And when we talk about a minimum viable product, it's testing kind of basically this whole system, right? This is how you could look at the financial metrics, at least like the funnel of your business model. You can look at it through this pirate lens metrics. And what you might be thinking of here, which is what I would be thinking of, this is like, holy crap, that's kind of a lot. There's a lot going in there. And you're like, I don't know what any of these numbers are, right? And the problem is that when you're looking at that MVP from the start, there's a really big burden of assumption. You have to assume where the customers are and how you're going to acquire them. You have to assume what's going to get them into the system. And you're going to have to assume what features are going to get them to activate. And you're going to have to assume what's going to get them to pay you money, and that the pricing is right and the model is right. And should it be a freemium or should it be pay out of the box, and the pricing, packages and all that stuff. And you got to assume what's going to keep them engaged in the system. You got to assume what's going to get them referring. There's just so much built into there that you frankly just don't know. You just don't know. It's just too much, right? So an MVP is the wrong approach to testing something like this, because at least early on, because there's just so much you don't know yet, right? So let's talk about how, like as an example, but what we can do with this concept. I'm going to run through a little thought experiment real quick. So let's talk about MVP. We say like, well, that's as simple as possible, right? And this is the same definition before, right? So it's as simple as possible to test a business model, but no simpler. But is it really though? Thought experiment time, okay? What if we remove the secret sauce? What if we remove the thing that our app does and we do it manually? Well, we call that a Wizard of Oz. So now we have a UI, and the UI is kind of dumb, and the UIs are easy to develop, and so we get this UI, but then there's a man behind the curtain doing, pulling the strings and actually doing the work that this sophisticated algorithm maybe would do behind the scenes. So we remove the secret sauce, and we have something that's actually a lot simpler. Okay, all right, cool. But what if we remove the make-believe? Well, now we have a concierge prototype, right? This is where like you're direct with the user. Like you're not saying that this is a fancy algorithm and really it's you. You're just saying, I'm gonna do this for you, right? Pay me money to do this for you, because then if you can get them to pay you, you can get them to pay software, right? So you do that, but they're paying the same price as if it was software because you're testing that they'll pay for it, right? So you're not making any money, but you're proving that people will pay you to solve it. So that's cool. So you're doing a service, right? But what if we remove the service? Now we just have a landing page, right? So you take an offer and you put it on a landing page and then you get people to sign up, maybe buy. Okay, now we're just testing, will people buy this in the first place? So will they come in, we'll acquire them, and will they, kind of sign up at that point? Okay, cool. What if we take that landing page and remove the offer, right? Remove the offer, now we have maybe a clickable prototype. So now we go, maybe even a paper, a Figma thing, whatever it is, you go in front of a customer and you show them the solution. You try to test that they want it, right? Can you get something in front of them that proves that they want it? Because you're just like showing them that, well, that's interesting. And yeah, Scott, Envision is another great way to do those kind of prototypes. So now we have this clickable prototype. But what if we remove the product itself? So this is where you could do a boomerang. This is where you take a competitor's product, you put it in front of a customer, and you gather insight on what they don't like and what they do like, so that you can develop a compelling value proposition to compete with that customer. But now you don't even have a product that you're putting in front of customers. So that's interesting. We're testing even less. We've removed so many assumptions. Can we go further? We sure can. What if we remove the problem itself? This is where, I forget who said it, but in the chat, customer interviews, right? We remove the problem from this. We can just go talk to customers, engage with them, find out what works for them, what doesn't work for them, and what are their wants, what are their needs, what are their fears, what do they do when they encounter that problem, and why isn't that working for them, and gain all of that insight to try to do that. So an MVP isn't as simple as possible. We absolutely can simplify it down, right? Now, I'm not telling you to simplify it down. That's a thought experiment. Okay. All right. Drop in the chat. Have you built too much before? I have. I'm just really curious. Empathize with me. Have you built too much before when you shouldn't have? Let me know. Make me feel better about my failure here by letting me know if you've done it too. In the meantime, Sam asks, I have a market research survey with 42 responses on the business. Is that enough to test the acquisition before the MVP? Is that considered good data? And Brian, thank you very much for empathizing with me. Okay, so is it considered good data? It's going to depend on what you mean by good data, but here's what I would say. So when we start talking to customers and we're trying to get a narrow question answered, because we're trying to figure out, are we on the right track? Is it over here versus is it over there? Right? When we're trying to do that, we don't need like a huge sample size. It's not about, can I talk to 500 people or something like that? Because you could talk to 5 people and actually know if you're on the right track, as long as you're asking good questions. The really important thing to keep in mind is that when you're doing something like that, you're not doing quantitative research. So this idea of like statistics and statistical significance and all this, it doesn't matter. We're not there yet. What we're trying to actually do is qualitative research. We're trying to understand people. And so as you start talking to people, 42 is, in theory, at least like a large enough number to understand, what do people feel, right? What are they going through? What are their problems? Is, if I put my value proposition in front of them, does it resonate? That kind of thing. So I don't know, I would need to know more to like really answer your question about it being good data, but there's nothing wrong with the number 42, and there's nothing wrong with doing surveys. I would add on to that, the biggest traps in there that people fall for when they do interviews is they try to remove themselves from it. So they do a survey, like a Survey Monkey or a Google form or something like that, and then they just put it out on the internet. Problem is, you're actually probably learning next to nothing. That's because it's assuming it's assuming too much. It's assuming that you can do quantitative research when you can't. You really need to get eyeball to eyeball with people. Second is you need to ask open-ended questions and not closed questions. Not would you rather or would you, do this. You want to ask, tell me about a time when. Right? Oh, have you ever encountered this problem? Tell me about that, right? Like, what did you try? Why didn't it work, right? You're trying to ask open-ended questions to get empathy and get data from them about what they're experiencing. And you can't do that if you ask closed-ended questions. And the third big trap that you fall into when you do something like that is you lead people on in ways that you're not necessarily expecting. And so if we have time, I'll come back to that. I'm not really talking about customer interviews today, but it's a subject I like. So in the Q&A, we can come back to that if we have time. But my short answer is it depends, but there's nothing wrong with what you said. Cool. Leah says, I know someone who already spent over 30K and they still don't have the answer to any of the 4 triangles. That sounds painful, but I've been there. My first startup was a catastrophic failure. I'd say I know someone who spent 30K of their own money to build a prototype before they did any customer validation. Yeah, I see that a lot. It hurts me when I hear that. Oh, so bad. But yes, Gianna also empathizing with me. So thank you so much for doing that. So okay, so we're talking about, testing your business model, and we said, all right, we can theoretically simplify an MVP, right? So hopefully I've disabused you of the notion that you don't have to go with something as big as an MVP, but that still doesn't tell you what to do. So how do you know what to test, right? What's the point of testing? Right. Well, the point of testing is to reduce risk, right? We have a big amount of assumptions that we're baking in at the start, and we want to not do that, right? So we want to reduce risk. So the best place to start with how to test your business model is to understand what risk is. And it's not complicated. It's really simple, actually. Risk is just the intersection of importance and uncertainty. That's it. That's what risk is. The more uncertain and the more important something is, the riskier it is. Okay, so let's break it down. So if we look at, we can see on the x-axis here, we have uncertainty, and on the y-axis, we have importance. So let's break them down, right? So if you take all of these assumptions that you have, you're baking into your business model, which at the start might just be 4 sentences. That's it, right? And you can start with those. And as you get more and more detailed, right, those 4 little assumptions you started with are going to become 40 assumptions, right? As you keep going along in the process. So you take each of those assumptions and you say, well, how much data do I have? And so all the way near the 0 part of the x-axis, we could say, okay, we have conclusive data. We know it. The data is there and it's conclusive. Or you could say we have compelling data, right? So there's data and it's pretty, it's strong. It's not conclusive, but it's strong, right? Then you can, okay, well, we got some data, right? We got some data. Okay, right? And then, okay, we don't have any data, but it's a reasonable inference, right? It makes sense, it's logically consistent, but we don't necessarily have data yet. And then we have all the way of that, well, it's a wild ass guess, right? A WAG. Maybe it's a scientific wild ass guess, right? And so that's kind of the spectrum of uncertainty, that we're looking at. And way more things are a wild ass guess than you think. And that's okay. That's totally fine. You just need to know that that's what it is, right? So this is how you measure uncertainty. Before we move on there, Brian's talking about, let's see, I know some people who spent a lot of money to build a prototype. All right. Yeah, people do it. People do it all the time. They really do. They really do. Lily says it's about egos as well, and they believe their assumptions are truth, which Laura thinks is really true too. Yeah, totally. That's actually because the biggest game that an entrepreneur plays is in their head, and it's a tension that you always have to keep between. It's delusion. The tensions between knowing that most startups fail and that you're not going to fail, right? Because if you think that all startups fail, you have no reason to start the process, right? You got to believe that you're going to succeed. But if you don't hold in tension that understanding that most startups fail and how they fail and you're likely to fail, then you're not going to get up anywhere. And so if you let your ego get in the way and one of those wins out, you never listen to customers, you never hear what they're saying, and you crash and burn. So super wise, Lily. Couldn't agree more. Right, let's move to the other axis. So how bad is it if each assumption is wrong, right? That's what when we talk about importance, that's what I mean. How bad is it? So it could be something like, it's inconsequential. If we're wrong, who cares, right? Okay. Or all right, it matters. We don't want to be wrong. It matters. It's not going to kill us, but it And it's like, okay, yeah, we need to be right about that. That's kind of getting important. And then oh gosh, this is critical. Like, I really got to get this right. If I don't get this right, this isn't good. This isn't good. And then the last part, you have unrecoverable, right? If you're wrong about this, the business can't possibly exist. Think of something like, do customers actually have the problem you think they do? If they don't, you're done, right? And talking to them, you might discover a problem that you can solve, but the original thing you're working on, unrecoverable, right? They don't have the problem. If nobody has the problem, not worth your time, right? So how bad is it if you're actually wrong? Right? And so that's what we're looking for, right? What we're looking for is which of those assumptions are riskiest, meaning which of them are both really uncertain and are really important to get right. Those riskiest assumptions are where we find the most value in testing right now. In fact, I'll go so far as to say that the most important thing you can do at any stage of the startup journey, the most important thing you can do on any day at any stage of the startup journey is to be testing your riskiest assumption, because it's the thing that can kill you, right? And you don't always get an answer back in a day. It might take a month to get the answer back, right? Sometimes that's the case. Really early stage startups, it doesn't, by the way. But it can take you time, to test something, and that's okay, right? But you still have to be saying, like, this is our priority. Our priority is testing this risky thing because it can sink us. So let's say you identify what that really risky assumption is. It's really uncertain, right? And that's really important to get right. How do you actually go about the process of testing that, right? In other words, how do you test a business model? How do you actually go and make that into a thing? So let's bounce up for a moment and talk about what we mean, right? When we talk about tests, we're talking about experiments. So let's start there, right? What the heck is an experiment? Well, if you remember from your science class, right, it's a controlled test of some hypothesis where we know what to measure and what an unsuccessful measurement looks like, right? So we're going to put a thing out there. We're going to say, I think X is going to happen, and we're going to know if X happens because, and if X happens, great. If X doesn't happen, fail, right? Experiment. But I introduced a new word here, right? Nowhere in here does it say assumption. It says hypothesis. And those aren't the same things. So let's talk about an hypothesis, right? An hypothesis is a version of an assumption that's testable, that's precise, and that it's discrete, right? So let's break those down. So if in order to be testable, right, we're talking about falsifiable, right? We have to be able to show through the experiment a result that is unambiguously true or false. There's no interpretations. No, well, maybe, no. It either worked or it didn't, right? You have to have a pass-fail. And so it has to be falsifiable. It also has to be precise. And by this, we mean you have to know exactly what you're actually testing. You have to know the who, the what, the when, the where, the how much, right? You have to get really clear so that you understand what the thing is that you're testing. That's how you get to a place where success or failure can be unambiguously defined. And then lastly, it has to be discrete, meaning we're testing one thing. One lonely little thing. If you test too much, you're going to get false positives. The results are going to be messy. And again, that goes right back to this idea of an MVP. Let's say you build this whole MVP with all those pirate metrics and all the business model stuff all baked into it. And you go out there and people don't buy it. What did you learn? I don't know. I don't know what you learned because there were too many assumptions out there, right? So you have to figure out, like, what's the one thing I'm going to test? What's the one riskiest assumption? And how do I go test that thing? Right? So an hypothesis is precise, it's discrete, and it's falsifiable. We got to know, did it work or did it not? So how do we get from an assumption to an hypothesis? Right? So let me give you an example. This is the easiest way to do it. So I'm going to give you an example. It's a bad example. It's contrived, but it's going to be like an Uber like business, right? It's a ride sharing thing just because it's easy to understand. And so in order for this thing to work, I have this assumption that people have places that they need to go on a regular basis. Kind of important because if they don't, then they're not going to pay me to get them there, right? So it's a kind of an important assumption. And we're just going to pretend that that this is really uncertain, right? Again, contrived example. So that's an assumption. Now, the problem is you could put an experiment out there and you could just go talk to customers and you could just find out, like, are people going places? But none of these terms are defined. Who are people? What are places? What does it mean to go on a regular basis? None of those terms are defined. And so what ends up happening is people run an experiment where they say, I'm going to put this out there. I'm going to put this survey out there, and I'm just going to see what happens. The problem with seeing what happens is that you'll always succeed in seeing what happens, but you won't actually learn anything at the end of the day. In order to learn, you have to have the possibility of failure. So never just see what happens. Come up with a really specific version of that assumption that makes sense. And I'll come back to that in a second. But here's that same assumption translated into an hypothesis. Current users of taxi services travel an average of 110 miles per month by cab. Precise, discrete, and falsifiable, right? So who are the people? The people are customers, and who are using our competitor, which is the old taxi service, right? We want to know if they travel regularly, which means like we think that for our business to work, and kind of model is we're assuming that they travel an average of 110 miles per month, right? In those cabs, that's what we think. And now we can go out there, we could talk to customers, and we can find out. Or we can get market research and industry data or whatever. We can find out and answer this question. It's either true or false. So two things I want to say about that, right? Those two things are, first, that how do you know where did 110 miles come, where from all this come from, right? You probably made it up. You probably made it up. And where does that come from? It comes from the idea that somewhere in your brain, if we go back to this theory of hugeness, right? This credible theory of hugeness is a theory of how you're going to get there. And this theory, right, has baked into it some type of system that there are people, they're going to pay us, they're going to stay in, right? And that they're going to, we're going to retain, they're going to refer. So you can start putting numbers to that right away. It's wrong. All the numbers are wrong, but you can start putting numbers to them right away. And then you can say like, well, that means that we could get X number of revenue. Cool. So now you run this experiment and you get a result back. And that result doesn't match because you were wrong, right? We knew you were wrong, right? But now that you're wrong, you're forced to say, because my experiment failed, what does that mean? What does it mean to be wrong about that? Then you go back and say, well, they don't actually travel that much, which means that our engagement rate, like inside the system, and therefore our revenue is actually lower than we thought. Well, let's plug that into our model. Let's see what happens. Does that kill us? Does it just make us less profitable, right? What does it mean to be wrong about that? And that's the second thing that I wanted to say, is that just because the experiment failed doesn't mean you're done, doesn't mean you're even on the wrong track necessarily. It means that you need to find out what it means to be wrong so that you can go back and revise your model, right? Okay, so yeah, some assumptions in the chat there, like the assumption that the city won't arrest your drivers. Yeah, that would be too bad, I think, for this kind of business. All right. So let's keep going. We have an hypothesis. How do we actually test it? Right? We said testing business models. So now we've gotten to an hypothesis. That's cool. How do we actually go through the process of testing this? And in order to understand this, you got to understand design thinking a little bit. So we could take design thinking, we can really simplify it down to a 3-step process for startups. You could find desirability, then you find viability, and then you find feasibility. What this means, desirability is, do people want it? Are there customers? Are they out there? Do they have the problem we think we do? Is this the solution that they want? Do they want this thing? Because don't waste time, don't waste your life building things that people don't want, right? So is it desirable? So you start out in an early stage startup looking for desirability. Then you move on to viability. You move on to, okay, people have the problem and they claim they want a solution. Can we turn this into a good business, right? Can we make money doing this? Don't waste time building something that's going to make you poor, right? Unless it's a charity passion project and that's what you want to do, that's fine. But for a startup, right? So you want to prove that there's viability there. And third, you want to prove that it's feasible, that you can actually do it, right? That you can bring this thing to market and that the marketplace isn't just going to kill you. That competitors can't just, because you're not defensible and competitors can just come in and take you out or whatever, right? There's a lot more I could say about feasibility, but I'm just going to kind of leave it there for now because it's not really relevant here. But that's what we're talking about. Is it desirable? Do people want it? If they do want it, can we make good money doing it? If we can make good money doing it, should we do it in the first place, right? Should we even head down that path? So that's what we're trying to do when we set up this system. And so our experiments are actually broken down along those lines. So let's look at it, right? So the first category of experiments are discovery experiments. This is where we're at. This is if we go back to running those surveys where you talk to those, 42 people about baked goods. And it's okay, I'm seeking to understand. I'm trying to find if there's a need, right? I'm discovering out there, right? And so here's some examples of discovery experiments. Customer interviews are a great one. This is where you just literally go and talk to customers, right? Or you do surveys and that kind of thing. But there's a lot of other stuff you could do too. You could put a little explainer video of the problem in front of a customer and see if they go, yes, do you have a solution to that? Right? Try to get that kind of thing going there. You can look at search data. Are a lot of people searching for something on Google or YouTube or whatever and not really getting the results? So you can kind of search for, are there people like biting at it, right? Are they trying to find this thing? You could do social media campaigns or run a little ad. Just throw a little ad out there and see if people click on it. It doesn't even matter if it goes anywhere. You're just going to click, right? So you can discover if there's a need out there. Discovery experiments. The next category, the second category, is validation experiments, where we're actually trying to test if we're right, right? You see the difference there? Discovery, we're trying to learn about them and are they there? And the second test is we're going to say, are we right about them? Are we right about the solution? Are we right about what they want and how they want to pay? Are we right about the who, what, how, and why, right? So that's what we're looking for, and we want to validate that those things are real. So here are some validation experiments. I already talked about clickable prototypes. I talked about concierge, right? I talked about a landing page offer before. All of those require simplifying that MVP, as was Wizard of Oz. You can get letters of intent. You can go out, and if you're doing like a B2B thing, you can go out, talk to customers, find out that they're interested, get a letter of intent from them so that when you build it, you've got somebody ready to buy. Or, and Laura actually mentioned this in the chat, you do a pop-up store somewhere. Like, I want to open up a bakery, and I'm not saying this is what you want. Like, I want to open up a bakery. And so I first want to test, like, are my goods what people want? Is it serving a need with these things? So I'm going to go do a pop-up at the farmer's market or something like that just to see if people are going to buy my stuff, right? And like, oh, that's interesting. That's data I'm getting back because you're validating the need for those particular baked goods. So it's a great thing that you can do. You could also just go on Kickstarter and crowdfund the thing. What says better than people actually paying money for you to create the thing, right? And that's the process of you discover a need and then you validate it over time. And this is what we talk about when we say build, measure, learn. When we're talking about startups and lean startups, we say build, measure, learn. We're talking about this iteration process where you come up with a thing, like this business model, and you find the riskiest part of it, and then you go out and do a little experiment on it, and you get data back, right? You measure something and get the data back, and you learn and incorporate that into the process, and you keep refining over time until your assumptions that you're making get less and less and less risky. Because with greater data comes greater certainty, right? And so you can just de-risk the process without ever building it. What you never, ever want to do, what you never want to do is build something before you've proven that people want it. You never want to do that. It will kill you. You're front-loading all of the risk. So find the smallest possible thing you can test against your riskiest assumption, run a little experiment and see what happens. But don't go building the whole business model right from day one. You're not ready for it. You're probably wrong, and it's going to be very painful. All those stories you guys are dropping in the chat about people spending like 30K to like, it's the same thing regardless of how you slice and dice it. Or as Lily's saying, don't build it for them to come. Yeah, so it's not Field of Dreams like if I build it, they will come. But if they come, I will build it, right? And with that, let's take some questions. Otherwise, I got other stuff to talk about. Questions. Don't be shy. Raise your Zoom hand or drop a question in the chat. That's cool too. If there are no assumptions, if there are no questions, I'm going to assume one of two things. Either I lost all of you or I'm awesome. And I'm just kind of predisposed to conclude the latter. So
You're awesome, JDM.
Thanks, Rich.
I will have to say that I kind of wrote it in the chat, but almost 10 years ago, I started a startup and created a product and didn't really test it. And so once I finally took it to market, it was either they just didn't like it. I wish I had tested it out a little bit more. So it died a slow, lonely death. So it's very important to test it out.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I like the story that Kate kind of put in the chat over a distance here. So I'm probably going to botch Kate's story. But I'm like, okay, I have these baked goods and I think they're cool. And so then I started testing on coworkers and other people saying like, do people like my baked goods? And then, that's a tiny bet, right? You put it in front of somebody. And then you take one level further than that. Maybe you start doing a pop-up or something else. Then you take one level further than that. You just keep like ratcheting up and making bigger size bets as you go along the process. That's actually the story of how you do that right. But what I would strongly recommend is to compress the time, because what we have, and I'm not speaking to you specifically, Kate, but like what we have a tendency to actually procrastinate, not because we're naturally, like I'm a procrastinator. That's not what I mean by this. What I mean by this is that we have a natural tendency as entrepreneurs to avoid doing the things that hurt us, to avoid being like doing something that could fail. I have this idea and we think it's cool. And the moment I put it out there in front of customers, the very first moment they can tell me I'm full of shit. And that hurts. And so we have all different kinds of ways of putting a stop to that, of all this stuff that's disguised as progress that isn't progress. So like one of the things you can really do, like right off the box, is like there was somebody who wanted to start a restaurant. And he had this like interesting concept thing for a restaurant or whatever. Definitely not like a scalable startup. It's not that kind of thing. But the same principles apply. What I told him to do was, okay, see if next month you can get 5 people that you know to pay you for dinner, right? Come over to your house and you will cook them dinner. And then that's not the experiment. You may think that that's the experiment, but it's not. The people you know, who cares? The experiment is how many of those 5 will refer a friend for dinner number 2, right? Will they refer somebody into it? That's what you want to do. Laura dropped a link to a book, so Testing Business Ideas by David Bland and Alex Osterwalder. Definitely recommend that book. It's a great book. It has not all of the experiments that I talked about, but most of them. It's probably the best single source of startup experiments that you can run, along with some great content about assumptions mapping. I actually have it on my shelf over here. It's a great book. Definitely recommend it. I also agree with Laura. Throw out your experiment to challenge me. In fact, that was the last thing I had. Is I can shred your business models if you want me to. We can do that. But in the meantime, Mark, how to get ahead of the competition, like get the idea out there, but some company creates and builds faster. So it's interesting. So I'm going to say a couple of things about that. First, nobody steals ideas. Doesn't happen. Just doesn't. And let me tell you why. I see Kate has her hand up, so we'll get to Kate right after this. So, and then I can see another question in the chat. The idea that like we're going to put this thing out there and somebody's going to think it's so brilliant that they're going to kind of run with it is a little bit conceited, frankly. I actually wrote about this, and I did a video, like a TikTok video on this the other day, but just like literally like 3 days ago. The idea is that when you're signing up to do a startup, you're signing up to work harder than you've ever worked before on something that's probably not going to exist 3 years from now. That's the startup. That's what you're doing. That's what you're signing up for. And the idea that I'm going to put my idea out there and that somebody else is going to see it, think it's amazing and run with it. You think your idea is so like star-spangled awesome that when you put it out there, somebody else is going to then work harder than they've ever worked in their life for 3 years on something that probably won't go anywhere. Like, ideas don't get stolen. And the big companies that are out there can afford to just push you under, right? There's 2 things that happen there. One is like if it's brand new for them, they don't care. It's too risky for them. They want to wait for you to take a shellacking in the market and then figure out how to get past the shellacking, and then they'll buy you, because it's cheaper for them to buy things than to try 50 things and see what sticks, right? And then the second side of that are that if they're serving a customer that you're serving to, and they're serving them in a very similar way, that's when you get risk, because then they already have the customers, and so it's a much lower risk for them to try to get into your space, because acquisition's already taken care of, at least to a part. They already got the customers in the ecosystem, so that's where you have to worry about defensibility and stuff like that. But for the large part, get loud, talk to everybody, talk to your barista, like about what you're working on, everybody, because like that's the only way you're going to get the feedback. You can try to run in stealth, but and you can successfully make sure that nobody knows what you're working on. But when nobody knows what you're working on, your customer doesn't either. So there's that. Cool. Kate, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I've been half listening. I have a 7-week-old daughter, so if you hear her squeal in the background, that's what that is. So Yeah, the reason it was 2 years as well, because the pandemic, I am a full-time healthcare worker and needed a reason to cheer us all up during the last 2 years. So kind of why that took so long. And I stumbled upon baking gluten-free and sugar-free just because I'm a health nut, not because I'm any of those things really. But yeah, so now I have the opportunity, being a stay-at-home mom, to start the business. So that's kind of what took so long in the first place. But I love the idea about pop-up at the farmer's market before you go full-fledged into it. So.
Yeah, and I definitely wasn't calling you out for the 2 years thing, because
No, it makes sense though. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and it's hard. It's like what you always want to do is just like find out. So what the next bet to place is, right? And so like the next bet is always sized based on the data that you already got, right? And so whatever data you've got so far, you're like, no, what's the next bet that I have to take? And if I'm on the right track, then I increase the bet. And if I'm not on the right track, I make a different bet, right? And then keep increasing. And so like there's a lot of ideas you could come up with, but I think like a pop-up thing is, I don't know, it's logical, but I can't say that's right for you.
It's where I was headed anyway, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we had another question in the chat.
Question. I have a question.
Oh, Brian, interesting. Yeah, people are way more likely to help you than steal from you. Very true. Yeah, people are awesome. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. My question is this. About 2 years ago, I built up a crowdfunding platform where I never tested the market. I just assumed this would work because I've seen other platform. And 2 years later, I'm still trying to attract crowd to my platform. So my question is, what suggestion would you have for me?
Okay, so it kind of broke up a little bit there, but let me see if I understand your question. So you had a platform, you kind of built it out, customers didn't come, and now you're trying to figure out like what's next?
Correct.
Okay, yes. So it's the same process, it's just gonna look a little bit different. So this is really common. The usual story is this idea of distribution. So most people, when they try to make a startup, will build something, even if they don't go all in and like build the massive, they'll build some small thing and then try to get customers to come to it. And even though they can articulate the process of a startup is to like go, find a customer, find out, what their problem is, find that they have it, find if this is the right solution, and kind of build it. And they think that they've gone through that process where the first step of that process was find the customer, right? And so they didn't do that. And so instead of building a customer base, they built an app, and now they're like, in a lot of ways, a solution in search of a problem, right? But even if they're onto something, and even if it's a solution that does solve a real problem, they're now a problem in search of a customer. And like, that's kind of hard too, because then we got to figure out like, who are the people out there that have this problem? Where are they? Where do they hang out? What do they do all that? And so what you want to do is like, you do want to go through the same process, but it's going to look slightly different. So if I just make a million assumptions, the best thing you could do is form an hypothesis of what the customer is. What do they look like? You might be wrong, but you're going to find out like this, I think, is what the customer looks like. And that's because that's your riskiest assumption. Since you don't have them, you have to assume that you know who they are. So, you write down like, this is what I think the customer is. That's my risky assumption. I'm going to test that. So how do you do that? You come up with where all of those customers are. Where, like, are they on Twitter? Are they, do they all just happen to walk into Whole Foods? And if I just go into Whole Foods, I can find them. Do they go to trade shows? Like, where do they listen to particular podcasts or influencers that they follow? Like, what are all of the places, like the 24 places you can find that customer? So in other words, channels, right? Where are all the channels that you can get those customers? And then the second thing you do is you rank those channels, kind of like you would do with uncertainty and importance, but you do it with impact and the challenge, right? So you want to find of those channels, which one of them can you reach the most of those potential customers for the least effort, right? So there's an old joke, startup founder, she builds this product, it's great, she thinks her customers are on Twitter, so she goes and creates a Twitter account. Now she's got 2 startups, right? Because building a Twitter is like, I can say from personal experience, really freaking hard, right? And so now you're trying to build an audience. It's like, That's really high effort. So you want to find the channel that has the least amount of effort for the most amount of customers. And so that's step 2, right? So you listed all the places. Now you found the most efficient one, right? Most customers, least effort. And then the third step for that is you go to that channel and put a message up there. That could be a value prop. It could be a problem statement. It could be a sign up. It doesn't matter, but like you're putting a message out there to see if it resonates. And try to make it as light as possible, again, because we're trying to get discreet. So we're trying to be like as limited as possible. Put a statement out there and see if it resonates. And if it doesn't, was the channel wrong or was the customer wrong? Right? So that's the process that you want to go through. As an example, channels can be really broad. So it can be like if you happen to know an influencer that these people pay attention to, great, right? Because you can get access to their audience. Most of us don't. So Airbnb is a good example. What they did when in their early stages is that like they have a two-sided market. Two-sided markets are hard. So they started to get people who had the platform listed. I'm sorry, they started to get on the platform people who had properties to list because they knew people who would do this and they were doing it, right? So like they were getting, but then there were no renters. And until you get more renters on the platform, you're not going to get more businesses. They're like chicken and egg, right? How do we do this? So what they did was that they said, well, where are all of the renters right now? They're on Craigslist. So what they did is they created an automated API connection just using Craigslist Open API so that anytime a property was listed on Airbnb, it was thrown onto Craigslist where the audience already was. So for a very small, like a dev spike, like a day, probably more than that, but like a day or two, right, of development work, they got all of their properties in front of the millions of people who were on Craigslist. And then the people who clicked the link in Craigslist would go to Airbnb. It's called growth hacking. Right. So it's the same process though. Where is everybody? Which is the easiest for the most impact for them. That was like, it's on Craigslist. And then they ran a little experiment to see if it worked.
Thank you.
Sure. Otherwise we'd have to get a lot more specific about what you're working on, but that's the 30,000 foot.
So Josh, how do people engage you? I mean, I know you do this for a living, so should they do you do it informally or do you service for hire or what's the process?
Yeah.
I'm actually thinking I probably need to schedule some time with you, Josh.
Well, I'd love to chat with you and catch up, Rich. It's been the pandemic's kind of thrown a wrench into our relationship. Yes, I appreciate the question. Thank you. Thank you very much for asking. There's a few different ways to engage with me. I think like the easiest thing, if you want to get in touch with me, you can hit jdm.bio. That's just where I am on the internet. And so links to all of the things are there, including you can contact me by email or your favorite social platform or whatever. So if you just want to connect with me, that's the best way to do it. But how you can engage me is I do basically 4 things, as I mentioned. So one of the things that I do are all of these kinds of community programs like these talks and workshops. So if you want to just if you want to get good at what I do and kind of get exposed to these things, come to the things I come hang out with like every single Wednesday. At 9 a.m., I'm at 1 Million Cups, right? I'll be there tomorrow morning. And where we hear presenters, 2 different startup founders present about their company, and we give them advice and feedback, and we learn from them, and they learn from us. It's pretty cool. Thanks, Laura, for dropping the link in the chat. And so, like, right? So you just come hang out with me with that. I do all kinds of stuff like this and startup weekends and everything, so you can come engage with me that way. I also create content everywhere. So if you just want to absorb my random musings and ramblings, I publish every single day online, 7 days a week, across multiple platforms. I listed a couple of them there a second ago, but like I publish every day on LinkedIn, on Twitter. I publish video shorts on YouTube and Instagram and TikTok, and I do all kinds of stuff. So I publish literally every single day. So if you want to just kind of get my brain that way, you totally can. Another thing, kind of the intersection of community and content, is every Thursday morning, I have office hours. So if you have a question for me, you can just ask me a question and then join my live stream, which is on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn. And you can join me in the chat too and have a live interaction, kind of like what we're doing here. Can't go on videos, but at least we can go in the chat and I can answer your questions. Thanks, Laura, for dropping the link in the chat. If you go to that link that Laura dropped in there, you can actually send me a video question if you have one, and then I'll play the video question and then answer it in my office hours. So that's totally free too. So that ends the free stuff. There's a lot of stuff in that list, but that ends the free stuff. Aside from that, if you're a startup that's further along, you have equity investment or you have substantial revenue, then I run a consulting company that helps you find product market fit faster. We do design sprints, these time compressed little ways of finding the right hypothesis, the things that we're talking about today, finding the right next hypothesis and the bet, how do we test it? And then, you go do that and, with our help or whatever. So I do that. And then for first-time founders who are trying to get their first customers and trying to go through that process, I do for a small group, a select group, I do one-on-one coaching to help with the most challenging parts of the journey. So that can be creating your startup pitch is something I do really often. How do you figure out what your next hypothesis is? We just get together for an hour for 90 minutes for some of it, shred your business model or shred your pitch or whatever, and give you one powerful next step to run with. So those are the ways to engage with me throughout the community with the content I do, with the Right Box, my consulting company, if you're further along, or you can do one-on-one coaching with me. So yeah. Scene.
Well, we're actually kind of at the end. Is there any other last minute questions before we close up?
Let's see. Sam says, I have a fintech wealth management stock market crypto investment app that solves the problem of the stock market volatility by predicting the market based on social media sentiment and market movements using artificial intelligence. A subscription model better for fintech or the razors and blades model. I'm not sure what the razors and blades would be in that particular context, but I can think usually just standard fintech would be subscription models. Common for them to also get a share of transaction. So this is where on a trade, you take a cut of the trade, or in the case of your standard stock market trading, as I'm sure you know, if you're in the fintech space, you have a trading fee, right? It's $7 or whatever to do the trade. And so that is, I'm blanking on it's a usage fee, I think, is the business model pattern for that, but that's also AWS, right? You have no fee to join AWS, but you pay for the servers that you use, you pay for the files that you use, and that kind of stuff. It's a usage-based thing. So I think usage subscription, I'm not sure exactly what razor blades would look like, but maybe that would be something as well. So I would explore more in there, but those are the most common ones for fintech.
Okay, looks like I think that's all of the questions, but Josh, you did it. Josh, you did a great job. I see people clapping, a lot of applause.
Deep Japanese bow.
I actually, as soon as this is all done, I'll go ahead and edit this and post it, and I'll send it to you, and you can share it on your social media, Josh. And with that, let's just start the video. Okay. All right, Laura, thank you for that. With that, I'll just go ahead and close out, but thank you very much, Josh. We're going to take July off, and then I will have to find a speaker for August. So thank you very much, Josh. Appreciate all that you've done and all that you do for your community. I can't wait for the next, what was it called? The Startup Challenge. That's something that you're working on. So I can't wait to see that. And Laura, thanks so much for hosting, and everybody, thanks for coming in and being part of the community. Probably we'll see in the next few months we may go live again with snacks and live music, but we'll see how that goes. All right, so everybody have a great evening.
Thank you.